Station, this is Houston. Are you ready for the event?
Houston Station, we are ready.
CBS Late Late Show, this is Mission Control Houston. Please call station for a voice check.
Station, this is James Corden with the CBS Late Late Show. How do you hear me?
James, welcome aboard the International Space Station. We heard you loud and clear.
Oh, it's so lovely to see you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. How are you getting on up there? How are you doing? Are you okay?
We're doing pretty good. We've been here, I guess, just about a month now, right? And I think we're assimilating into the ISS life, trying to help Chris out as much as we can. And actually, in just a few days, we're going to be performing some spacewalks to replace some batteries on board the outside of the space station.
Well, I mean, I don't even like it if I have to replace batteries in the remote, let alone going out to do a spacewalk. Now, I want to ask you about your flight. Because you were the first humans to fly the SpaceX shuttle. You've both had missions to space before. Were you more nervous taking off this time in a brand new spacecraft than you were previously in a regular shuttle?
No, definitely not. We spent the better part of 5 years working on this vehicle with SpaceX, and especially the last two where we lived out in California more than we were at home in Houston. And I think we got to know the vehicle pretty well. We got to know the folks out at SpaceX very well and work through all the challenges that we had developing the vehicle. And I think we were very comfortable by the time it was ready for us to fly. We also had a couple of flights prior to that. We had an uncrewed test mission that they flew to the space station about a year prior, and then they flew an in-flight abort test just a few months ago before our flight. So all in all, I don't think nervous. I think we were pretty excited, and we were glad to be at that point since it had been a pretty long 5-year road to get there.
Now, you described the good catch, Bob. Now, you described the SpaceX craft as being sort of like you're in a giant iPad. Does that not scare you more? I feel if I was going to space, I'd want definite buttons and levers rather than the prospect of accidentally deleting something with my elbow. Is it not more scary with touch screens everywhere?
That's a really good question. We get asked quite a bit, James, about what it's like to fly a space iPad. And from both of our experiences, they did a really good job. We spent years working on these displays to make sure you can't have things like your email and different applications on there that you could accidentally delete. It pretty much runs one program, and that one program is flying the SpaceX spacecraft. And we do, folks talk a lot about the iPad aspect of things, but we do have a series of buttons that allow us to do some things like separate the capsule if the rocket was performing badly when we were headed uphill. And it also allows us to do things like deploy the parachutes manually if we needed to get the chutes out coming home, just in case there was a problem. So we do have a handful of buttons. It's not all just iPads, but even with that, we took a lot of care to make sure nothing extraneous was on those iPads or those touchscreens that could cause us a problem.
Well, that's great. Now, I'm jealous of both of you right now because I've spent most of my life wanting to be weightless. And you are now in the zero-G. Tell me, what's the best and worst thing about living life in zero gravity every day?
Doug and I talked quite a bit about that, knowing some of the things that people might ask us about. And living in zero gravity, the probably the most frustrating thing is one of the things you really take for granted is that if you put something down, at least if nobody moves it, it will be there when you get back. Here in space, you got to go through some extra efforts to make sure things stay where you put them. As you can see, we've got a trimmer on a little cord, a little leash, so it doesn't get away from us. And you can imagine that there's a lot of places where, like going to the restroom, for example, where you like stuff to stay where you put it. And so we definitely find that frustrating at times.
And what have you got here, Doug? Is this just a little snack? Oh, look at this. That's magnificent. Oh, I find that the entire thing is mind-blowing to me. Now, can we talk about your return to Earth for a moment? How are you going to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere when you come back?
Well, it's a similar process for all space vehicles. You are at a speed right now of about 17,500 miles an hour, and you have to slow down to less than 30 miles an hour before we splash down in the water. So it's a combination of entering the Earth's atmosphere with a heat shield that protects us from the buildup of heat as we go through the Earth's plasma as we re-enter. And as we re-enter, we also slow down significantly. Then we'll slow down a little bit more once our drogue chutes come out. So we have a series of parachutes that'll come out to slow us down. So there's 2 drogue chutes that'll come out first, and then we'll have 4 main parachutes. And then ideally we'll splash down somewhere off the east coast of Florida is our prime landing site. A little over about an hour after we fire our deorbit engines to start that burn to re-enter.
Now, that's all very technical, but just to put it in layman's terms, you're essentially in a box with parachutes attached to it, and you're just going to fall through the sky, right? I mean, this is utterly terrifying to me. Like, are you worried about, are you going to, presumably, do you, like, throw up when you're in there?
Yeah, great question. I don't think we'll have to worry about too much of that while we're re-entering. I think what we're more concerned about from the throw-up standpoint is once we are in the water for a little while. One effect of being in space, especially for us now being in space by the time we come back, likely a couple months, is you're very conditioned to microgravity and you're not so conditioned to gravity. And then your vestibular system, your inner ears play tricks with you. So it's a lot like, as you can imagine, even if you decided to go fishing, deep sea fishing one day, and you've lived on Earth your whole life and you've gone out fishing and people get seasick, we're going to do it from space and end up in the water. So there's a pretty good likelihood that we may see breakfast twice on that particular day.
Now, I really want to ask you, when you left Earth, it's such a difficult time. Here, there is so much division, not just in America, across the whole world. The entire planet feels divided. So many countries feel divided. When you look back at planet Earth, what do you see and what do you feel? And do you have any words of encouragement for us humble Earthlings who are here right now?
I think we're trying to be humble space folks as well up here. I think that Doug referred to it a little bit earlier when he talked about the time we spent out in California, building a partnership and a relationship with the team of SpaceX engineers that was going to build the spacecraft that our lives were going to depend on all the way into orbit and to bring us home safely. We really recognize on board the International Space Station the value of working together, creating some sort of common understanding and cooperation. We have cosmonaut crewmates that we work with on a routine basis. During the spacewalk that we'll perform later this week, we'll actually have a cosmonaut helping us get suited up and head out the door, making sure everything is closed up for us. And so I think that's the message that we would like to share, with all the folks who are still back on Earth, is that, our success depends on cooperation and understanding and respect for the other folks that are doing their jobs to help us come back safely or execute a spacewalk safely. And that's what it's going to take to get through these challenging times back on Earth, whether it's the pandemic or some of the other strife that's going on. That understanding and that cooperation and that need and effort that goes into what's required to just work together to pull off things successfully is what we're going to have to do back on Earth as well. And hopefully we can just be an example of that, and one that with commercial partners or with our cosmonaut friends is a great demonstration for folks around the world.
Well, that's a lovely message. Thank you so much. We wish you the very, very best, hoping for a safe return to Earth. Thank you so much, Bob and Doug, NASA and SpaceX, for taking the time to talk to us today. We really, really appreciate it. Stay safe up there, fellas. We'll be right back with more of the Late Late Show right after this.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes the CBS Late Late Show portion of the event. Please stand by for a voice check from NPR Morning Edition.
Station, this is Steve Inskeep with NPR's Morning Edition. How do you hear me?
Steve, welcome aboard. We hear you loud and clear.
Outstanding. Thank you for taking the time. Would each of you say your names so I don't get confused about who is who?
Hello, my name is Doug Hurley.
And my name is Bob Behnken.
Okay, thanks to you both. And just so you know, we may from time to time hear a 4-year-old because I'm working from home, and the 4-year-old actually is playing with a Lego model of the Death Star, which seems very appropriate for this conversation, frankly, so I didn't make her go away.
Awesome.
How's the view?
When we get a chance to look out the window, it's spectacular. I can't begin to describe some of the sights that you get to see. You know, the Bahamas are just amazing to see from space. Any of the mountain ranges, the sunrises, the sunsets. It's just, if you sat in the cupola for 45 minutes and you had a rough day, you would immediately wash it all away. It's just an incredible view of our planet that we have from here.
You spoke in the plural, the sunrises and sunsets. How many sunrises per day?
16 sunrises and sunsets per day for us, and that's some of the best viewing out the cupola or the lab window, or even in the Russian segment. They've got some wonderful windows over there. So just the best views happen with those lighting changes. You can see a lot of wonderful things happening on the Earth, or you can see things that complicate matters, like the Saharan dust cloud that we've seen kind of migrating across the ocean.
Now, I was watching the video of your launch a few weeks ago and trying to compare it to images that are in my head of the Apollo space launches, which, of course, you guys didn't do, but you must be intimately familiar with. How are they similar or different? How is going into space now different than it was half a century ago?
I think at the basic level, not a lot different. You know, you're just thrust away trying to get a large payload into space. Obviously the main difference between the Falcon 9 Dragon spaceship that we flew and the Saturn V, the Apollo Saturn V, is just size. The Apollo vehicles were built to fly 2 different crew vehicles and 3 astronauts all the way to the moon and back, and the Falcon 9 Dragon combination gets us to the International Space Station and back. So just doesn't need to be as large, but very similar physics and very similar theories. It's just a modern version and a smaller, streamlined version.
Is the fact that you're in there with digital rather than analog equipment, with 21st century equipment, does that change the experience very much as far as you can tell?
I think the biggest change that we see is that if you go back to the earlier missions, the Apollo timeframe, the team on the ground did quite a bit of manual computation to ensure that the subtle burns that needed to happen with the engines on board the vehicle to accomplish something like, you know, rendezvousing or going into orbit around the moon very carefully to end up at the right landing site. A lot of that work had to be done with an entire team on the ground, and then those individual numbers added to a computer. We have the luxury of having much of that all on board our vehicle, and so in some sense what we did with our mission was verified the autonomous capability of the vehicle that we came up with, and so it was able to get all the way to space station pretty much by itself, and we monitored to make sure that that was happening safely, versus a series of activities that took very extensive ground coordination to make sure that they all happened with the aid of a very large team. That all happens with computation on board now.
So you're in much more of a self-driving car. Is that a fair analogy?
We're in a self-driving car with a lot of capability to make sure that we agree with what it's decided to do.
I know that you were involved in the commercial spaceflight program for a number of years before you got this opportunity. What did it mean for you, and what difference did it make for you on a day-to-day basis that you went up in a privately owned spacecraft?
Well, I think from our perspective, this was a NASA private company partnership. They had a partnership with both SpaceX and with Boeing to build these vehicles to provide transportation for crews to and from the space station. So it was a next step in the evolution of low Earth orbit and the next step in flight, frankly. We started out airplane flight. It was very restricted to start with, and then we had commercial airline companies and private companies, and so this is just that next evolution, I think, into low Earth orbit and into space, where private companies are going to take over some of the burden for that. From a personal standpoint, the opportunity to work on a brand new vehicle and fly on the first test flight of a brand new vehicle was just something that comes along once in a generation. So, when we were offered the opportunity to participate, obviously we wouldn't say no.
Do you talk among yourselves about what the possibilities might be 10 or 20 years from now because of some of the work you're doing now?
I think we talk amongst ourselves in terms of what the possibilities might even be next year or 3 years from now. We try to understand what might happen with our vehicle. Will it be reused by the company and NASA take advantage of using it to get another crew to the International Space Station? Or will the reuse of that vehicle result in an opportunity for somebody else, not a NASA crew, potentially to fly on board that vehicle? And that's really going to be up to SpaceX to determine what the best path forward for them is. And I know NASA has them on contract to deliver capabilities and crews to the International Space Station. But those reused vehicles will start in the much shorter term than 10 years from now, result in people, not NASA astronauts, potentially flying in space. Those opportunities exist.
You can see that now. You could see someone who has not made a life going to space as you have, just getting a chance to go.
Yes, if you look at the reuse that SpaceX has done with the first stage rockets that they have, it's opened up the door for missions to be launched that would be prohibitively expensive if you were to use another method for getting the vehicle into space. And I think the reuse of our capsule or follow-on capsules from ours, provides that opportunity as well. As the cost goes down, then really those opportunities will open up for other folks to fly on those vehicles. I think you'll still need somebody trained to go with them. And much like if you were to go scuba diving, you can be trained and go, but you want to go with somebody who's got some skills and some experience when you jump into those things for the first time. And, it really does depend on where you go as well. So going into orbit or just going to altitude is very different than trying to rendezvous with the space station or to, do something more complex like go into orbit around the moon. So the complexity varies, and what type of folks could sign up for a mission like that will vary. It may really be driven by how much time they want to invest in it as well, because training does take a long time to do complex missions.
Gentlemen, final question. Do you get a chance to follow the news from home, and does it feel different from the distance that you're at to be following it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's tough to see the world kind of in the state it's in right now from here. We obviously have a lot to do in a given day, but you're certainly not completely insulated from it just because we're connected to the world just like everybody else is in a sense. And so it's difficult to see the challenges that we're facing with the strife in the cities and with the pandemic and all the challenges that folks are going through. And, we just hope that people can look to the example of the International Space Station and the cooperation that we have with 5 major partners in several countries, and look to that and see that you can all work together for a common goal to make the world a better place. And then just by virtue of being able to look out the window, you see the world with no borders up here, and that does resonate with you, and hopefully that message can get back down to Earth that we need to be able to work together for the common good and not work against each other and argue all the time over things that shouldn't be argued about.
Colonel Hurley and Colonel Behnken, I could ask many more questions, but our time is up. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Station, this is Houston ACR. That concludes our event as we count down to 20 continuous years of humans living and working on the International Space Station.
Thank you to all participants from CBS and NPR. Station, we are now resuming operational audio communications.